speaks about the Morah Gittin, Titus HaRosh, when he entered the Kodesh HaKadoshim. He pierced his sword into the paroches and blood came out, and he thought, Chas v'sholom, that he killed the Rabbanu Shalom. There he went and committed an Aveira of Znus in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The end of the Kinnos speaks about the fact that they took boys and girls, to send them to Rome for immoral purposes. The girls jumped overboard and committed suicide in order not to be used for immoral purposes. And the boys likewise. This Kina has a connection to the second reason the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, was Gili Arayis. Immorality. People think that tznius is covering your body because there's something wrong, something erotic and dirty about the human body. It's not the case, because if that would be the case, then surely animal bodies, there's something wrong with them. And we should be makbid not to go to the zoo unless the animals are dressed. I don't know anybody, at least till today, maybe tomorrow will be different, but today I don't know anybody who's makbid not to go to the zoo unless the animals are dressed. In fact, I don't know any place in the world where they are makbid to dress their pets except in Los Angeles. And there that can't be because of tznius, because they don't dress themselves there. The idea of tznius is that we are neshamas. We were created as neshamas and lived in a spiritual world where we could function very nicely as neshamas. We could see with our eyes and hear with our ears and get around without arms and legs. And we came into this physical world, so we needed a physical body to be able to exist, like an astronaut. As long as the astronaut is on terra firma, he's on the earth, he can function very nicely without a special suit, without any special apparatus. When he goes into outer space, which is not compatible to a human being, he needs oxygen apparatus, he needs a pressurized suit, there's no air pressure there, he needs a radio to speak, there's no sound waves. When he comes back to earth, he takes off the suit. So too, as long as we were neshamas in a spiritual world, we could function very nicely without a body. When we came into this physical world, we needed a spacesuit, an inner spacesuit to be able to function. You need eyes to see and ears to hear, but that's not you. That's just a suit that we wear in this world to be able to function. And therefore, when we go back to that spiritual world, we leave the body here. We leave that suit. We take off the suit like the astronaut takes off the suit. Could be that's one reason why we express mourning for somebody that died by tearing our clothing. It's a sign that only the clothing's been torn, but the essence of the person still exists. Up until the Chet of Adam and Chava, which didn't last too long, a few hours, it was very clear that the neshama was the ikar and the body merely served the neshama and gave it an environment to be able to function in this world. But once Adam and Chava sinned and they used their bodies against their neshama, so now it's not so clear anymore. It's confusing. How can you say that the body is only a tool to enable the neshama to function when the body does things that are not good for the neshama? The body works against the neshama. So therefore, and not only that, maybe there is no neshama. All you see is a body. So in order to distract attention from the body which is visible, and to make the statement, there's more here than meets the eye. I'm not an animal. In an animal, what you see is what you get. There's nothing to cover. Nothing wrong with a body. But if you're not a body, you're a neshama, and it appears like you are a body, then you're an animal. So a person covers his body, and he makes the statement, there's more here than meets the eye. I'm not an animal. I'm a neshama. Don't get distracted by my body understand there's more here beneath the surface that's more of an ikr. And therefore, wherever there's an inner kedusha, and people could be distracted by the externals, there's an inyan of tznius, not only by human beings and not only by bodies. The Medrash says that when the Mishkan was finished, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Kan yofa tznius, here tznius is extra special by the Mishkan. And therefore the Mishkan was covered like a kala, like a bride with a veil in the front and a train in the back. What in the world was erotic about the Mishkan that had to be covered? I once heard a story, some relatives, children I guess, grandchildren of Shlomo Shvadron were by the Kosel on a Shabbos. And they saw an Israeli writing a kvittel on Shabbos and putting it in the wall. So they went over to him. They thought maybe somebody deathly ill at home and he thinks it's pikuach nefesh, allowed to write. So they asked him, what are you doing? Somebody sick? You think that it's okay to write on Shabbos to put a kvittel in the kosel? He said, no, I'm the captain of an Israeli soccer team. And we have a championship match this week, and I am putting in my request to the wall that we win. If that's what the Kosel HaMaravi is, or that's what the Beis HaMikdash is, a magical wall that you put in your request, then it's mamash avodah zarah. There's no difference between a mirror on the wall or wall on the ground. It's all the same. That's what you think the Beis HaMikdash is? That's what you think the Kosel HaMaravi is? Then you understand the external and you don't realize that the ikr is what's on the inside, the shechina. The Rabbanu Shalom's here. It's not a wall, not the externals. So by the Mishkan it was important to cover the externals and to make the statement the ikr is not what you see on the outside, the gold and silver and wood. The ikr is what's on the inside, the shechina, the neshama of this building. Second place where tznius is extra special is a Talmid Chacham. Rambam says Talmidei Chacham have to be extra tzanu in the way they dress, the way they speak, the way they eat. Something extra erotic about a Talmid Chacham that has to be extra tzanu. Now the idea here is the same thing. It's a very big sakana when it comes to Talmidei Chachamim. Because Chazal say, "Es Hashem Elokecha tira l'rabos Talmidei Chacham," that person has to stand in awe, mamish, the awe of the Rabbanu Shalom by a Talmid Chacham. That's very dangerous. Because if you attribute that to the personality of the Talmid Chacham, that's mamish borders on avodah zarah. You can make a Talmid Chacham into avodah zarah too. But the yira is the yiras haTorah that the Talmid Chacham represents, not his personality. Not to make personality cults around Talmidei Chacham, and we know that those exist. And when they exist, they lead to terrible aberrations without going into detail. But exist in, unfortunately, quite a few different places in Klal Yisrael, where they make Talmidei Chachamim into avodah zarah. There's a danger. So therefore the Talmid Chacham has to distract attention from his chitzonius and make the statement, what you have to is stand in awe of is not me, but it's the Torah that I represent. Excuse me. And the last place is women. By women also the special inyan of tznius, more even than men. Because unfortunately, in the secular world, women are judged mostly on their external attributes. And even in this progressive, liberated world, they still have Miss America pageants and Miss Universe pageants or whatever. And even though they fool themselves into thinking that now they worry about the careers of these women and they read their poetry and works that they did and speak about their careers, but it's all done in bathing suits, which has me believe that it's not the careers and the poetry that's the ikr. So in the eyes of the nations of the world, women are objects, external objects. From the Torah standpoint, women are the ikr kedusha of Klal Yisrael. And there's many, many sources. Just to give you one. Pasha. What determines whether any human being in this world has a nishmas Yisrael? Kedushas nishmas Yisrael. Basically only one factor, unless you're a ger. If you're a born Jew, there's one factor that determines that, and that is who your mother was. If your mother was Jewish, plain, Pashute Yidna, Your father could have been Genghis Khan. You're Jewish. And your father could be the biggest tzaddik in the world. If your mother wasn't Jewish, you're not Jewish. And up until recently, mothers were women. So women are the foundation of kedusha and Klal Yisrael. So therefore, a woman has to be extra careful to make the statement, don't get waylaid, don't get attracted by my externals. That's not the ikar of me. The ikar of me is what's on the inside, the neshama, the kedushas Yisrael that a Jewish woman represents. And that's tznius. Tznius is not covering something because it's no good. Just the opposite. There's a parak in Shabbos called hamatzniya. Oversimplifying it, basically, normally to be chayiv korban or chayiv misa on Shabbos, you need to take out a shear, carry out something less than a shear. It's not important enough to get misa or to bring a korban. Usually you need a grogris of food. But if somebody takes their wedding cake and they put it away nostalgically and they're machshav it, they put in a little box, a little piece, less than a grogris, and on Shabbos, by mistake, they carry that little piece of cake out, they're chayiv a korban. Because hamatzniya, because you're machshav it, enough to hide it away, that's tznius. Tznius is your machshav, your body, to show that it's not just an animal's body, but it is a tool to give the ability for your neshama to function. You're not a body, you're a neshama. And you cover your body for safekeeping. You cover it because it's choshev, because it's not just an animal, because there's more to it. That's called hamatzniya. And that's why begodim come from the lashon boged, a traitor, because the body was a traitor against the neshama. It needs begodim, it needs to be covered. And that's the idea of lavush, lo busha. Takes away a person's busha. What's busha? Busha's panim. Person's face is the screen that says everything that's going on within him. Sometimes a person, it's improper for what's within a person to bring those things to the surface. They're not fitting for a person. So there's a busha, there's a certain red light that lights up on a person's face where it says this is improper, this is not befitting a neshama to be able to act in this way. That's called busha. Busha's panim, and it's on the face, which is the interface between the external and the internal. And therefore all inyan of gili arayis, erva, or is all externals. Or an iver is a blind person who can't see anything more than what he can touch, the externals. He can't see beyond that. He can only feel. That's an iver. Orma, areinma, not being clothed is all external things. Pritzus, all of these words. Nivul peh is like a nevela. Speech should clothe in sound, something that's holy, that's a neshama day. When a person speaks, nivul peh, it's like a dead animal. It has no life inside. It's just an empty, it's words that have no inner value, have no inner kedusha. All gili arayis is gilui, is external. A person's an animal. Doesn't act like a neshama kedusha that happens to be clothed in a body. That doesn't mean that the external's not important. The externals are also important. Because if not, then tznius would be we should walk around in tents where nobody knows we have a body at all. Just a tent that covers our entire body with 2 slits for eyes, and that's it. Nobody knows you have a body. No arms, no legs, no nothing. To date, I don't know anybody who holds that that's the way to dress or to have tznius. Maybe we'll come to that, but that's not. And we find the Torah says that beauty, external beauty, is choshev. Sarah, baschof kevazai liyofi. Rochel, yefei toar v'yefei mareh. Yosef HaTzadik, same thing. The Vilna Gaon says on the pasuk, Sheker achein vehevel hayofi, isha yiras Hashem itisalo. That when is yofi and chein, sheker and hevel, when there's nothing more, when it's only external. But Isha Yiras Hashem, and an Isha Yiras Hashem, he tisalol, you should praise her for her yofi and her chen. Then there is importance to the external. The idea being, and then for the clothing that a person wears is also called mechabdusi. It's that which reflects externally the inner covenant of a person, like a person wears a uniform. Used to have doctors in my kehillah in Miami. Some of them would go and make rounds in the hospital, coming from a tennis match or whatever, dressed in Bermuda shorts and one of these colorful Bermuda shirts. And even though he had a stethoscope around his neck, you really couldn't relate to him with the same covet that you could relate to a doctor who went in a white coat. Not that the white coat made him a doctor, or the Bermuda shorts made him not a doctor, but how he appeared externally makes an impression on you. A policeman that's in a police uniform commands a lot more respect than if you walk around in shorts. So how you present yourself externally should reflect that inner kedusha that you have. That's real tznius. Tznius is a combination between balancing the external and dressing in a way that is not attracting and distracting from your kedusha, but attractive in a way that it represents that inner kedusha. And it's like wearing a uniform that represents what your neshama, what your tafkid in this world is. That's how a person has to dress. And dress, therefore, is not the ikr, but it definitely is something important, and therefore there's two ideas to tznius. One, covering those parts of the bodies that could be distracting, that could make someone feel that they're an animal and not a human being, and at the same time dressing them in a tasteful way that reflects that idea externally. And the Ribbono Shel Olam put that attraction between men and women in this world in a very, very strong way, and that distraction between men and women externally is a very strong, and people should realize that, and there's a reason for it. Because the Ribbono Shel Olam intended that people should get married, and there should be total shalom between a husband and wife, mamish one being, like the right and the left, the Chazon Ish says. In order to do that, you need a strong attraction between them. But zeh le'uma zeh, that same strong attraction that can be kedusha, can be the worst tumah and gili arayis too. The same power for good is the same exact power for the bad. And as strong as that power is for the good, that's how strong it is for the bad. And therefore a person who understands that he has to have extra careful shmira when it comes to these inyanim, because that power is a strong power. Tell the story of Rav Lapyan. Talmud came to him and asked permission to go to a chasana, a family chasana. It was in the middle of the summer. So Rav said, you have permission to leave the yeshiva and go to the chasana, but are all your relatives from? He said, no. He said, it's the middle of the summer here. Aren't you afraid that some of the women aren't going to be dressed properly, and it may be a tremendous nisayon for you? He said, Rebbe, Baruch Hashem, I've reached a level where that doesn't bother me anymore. So Velya said, you have permission to go to the chasana, but on one condition. Before you go, I want you to call a friend of mine. He gave him a number. The person came back about an hour later. He said, Rebbe, I think I got the wrong number, because every time I call the number you gave me, it's a doctor's office. He said, yeah, that's my friend. He's a doctor. He said, I'm 90 years old and blind in one eye, and these things still bother me. If they don't bother you, something's seriously wrong with you, and I think you should see a doctor. Tell the story of an old Rosh HaYeshiva who was sitting in his office, and an old sick lady came in for a bracha, and by accident she locked the door behind her. So Rosh HaYeshiva got up, there was a window behind him, and he climbed out the window onto a balcony. His Talmidim saw this, and they went over to him and said, Rebbe, you're an old man, she's an old sick lady. What would have been so terrible if you walked to the door and opened it and walked out of the room? Right? 2 more seconds. You had to run out the window. He said, Talmidim, the Yetzer Hara could have made me young and her well. Women taina that what difference does it make if the sleeves go till my elbow, past my elbow, an inch here, an inch there? What's enough to mean? Would you say the same thing if you knew that you were exposed to deadly radiation and only 3 inches of lead could protect you from that radiation? 2.5 inches, 2 3/4 inches, the radiation comes through. 3 inches stops the radiation. Would you say, well, it's a difference, 2.5 inches, 2 inches, whatever. It's all the same thing. It's not all the same thing. And if you're talking about something that is so powerful, that can be used for the good, but used equally for the bad, the worst kind of tumor in the world. So what you cover and how you cover it is very, very important. And again, it's not just how you affect other people, but it affects what kind of kedusha you have. Once my teenage daughters used to have my study, used to be a separate house. And when my older daughters became teenagers, they didn't want to share their room. We had at that time only 3 bedrooms in our house. 2 for the children and 1 for my wife and myself. And we have 11 children. So we had 6 boys in one room and 5 girls in the other room. And the girls didn't want to share their room with their bratty little sisters. So they asked me if they could move into my study. There were 2 bedrooms there that weren't being used, and they would each one have their own room, as befitting a teenage girl. So I gave them permission, except when Pesach came, my uncle, my old sick uncle, who was their babysitter when they were little babies, used to spend a month or 2 with us in the summer. And we had no other place to put him except in my study. So I told my daughters, you're going to have to move out of there because you can't be in the same building as your uncle because it's yichud. So they said, Tati, it's ridiculous. We'll stay in our room. He can stay in, we'll move all into one room. He can move in the other room. Right? Don't be chosh at us. We have no interest in our old uncle. And don't be chosh at him. He's an old sick uncle. What do you think? He's do something wrong? So I told them, amongst other things, that you're right. You're right. Maybe that nothing could happen here, and it's 100% moral. But that's not kedusha. Kedusha is not to be in a situation where anything could remotely ever possibly happen. That's the halachas of Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael have to be kedoshim, not just moral. Goyim can be moral. We have to be beyond morality. We have to be kedoshim also. That's what Klal Yisrael is, and today the nisyonos are so great in these areas. Everybody can carry around their pocket all the tumah of the world, all the gili arayos of the world, all the pornography. And tznius is not only covering your body. The Sefer HaChasidim says there's 7 things that a person needs for the shleimus of tznius. The first one is to speak softly and calmly, not to be ostentatious, running around, yelling around. That starts with being more subdued. Gomel chesed, not to look at only at the chitzonius of money or whatever, but to be a gomel chesed, to give to other people. Misrachek me'ahezek, don't damage other people. Respect their privacy, respect their place. Not to look at the mumim of other people, to see only the external, see inside what their neshama is. Don't look for their shortcomings. Don't speak lashon hara, emunah, and respecting other people's privacy and secrets. All of these things contribute to the idea of tznius, where a person is misracheg from chitzonius, from acting like an animal, just external things, and realizing that we are human beings with a neshama. So in Yirtzeh Hashem, if we understand that is how we start the day, Matovu Alecha Yaakov, you go out of your house, you go to shul, you're already amongst other people, the first thing to do is Matovu Alecha Yaakov, even though it was said by Bilam. But he understood also the greatness of Klal Yisrael is the tznius. We don't look into everybody else's business, and we don't want them to look into our business. People have privacy. The ikar is what's inside, not the externals. If we understand that, and we're masakin that chait of Gili Arayis, which destroyed the first Beis HaMikdash, and we contribute towards correcting that, being kedoshim, being tznuim, being the opposite of what Gili Arayis, respecting the pnimius of a person, men and women, then in Yirtzeh Hashem will be able to get up from the Gehenna of what Tisha B'Av represents in that respect also. Just two maisim. Girl during Kristallnacht had to get home, a Yaakov girl. She was afraid that if she ran through the streets and they recognized her as a Jew, they would kill her. She probably was right. So she looked a little bit like a shiksa. She didn't have a Jewish look to her. So she decided she's going to make it look like she's not Jewish. So she disheveled her hair, and she opened the top button on her blouse so she'd look like all the prutzos, all the goyish prutzos. She wouldn't take notice of her. And just before she went outside, she said, no, my grandmother always told me that you have to be a Yid no matter where you are in whatever situation. And I'm not going to stoop down to the level of these goyim even to save my life. And she rebuttoned her shirt, tucked it in, and ran through the streets. And Baruch Hashem, she made it home. She told her mother what had transpired. Her mother said, by buttoning that button, you saved your life. Because you're unaware of the fact that you're wearing a Magen David. Had you opened that button and the Magen David would have been exposed, then everybody would have known you're a Jew, and that would have meant your demise. By being shown there that sneas, with that sensitivity, in the end, that's what saved your life. Woman was in the hospital, dying, in a coma. Her son had bought her a tichel for her birthday when she was still well and never had a chance to give it to her. He brought the tichel to his mother, whose mother was known to be a tremendous tzaddikus, tzanua. And in the coma, he gave his mother this tichel, and the nurse said, I'll put it on her. At least she'll have what you gave her for her birthday before she leaves this world. The nurse took off her tichel she was wearing, and the mother cringed. The first time you could see any motion. She was motionless she cringed. And then she quickly put on the other tichel, and she relaxed. Here's a woman whose tznius was so integral to her essence that in a coma, she recognized the fact that her hair was uncovered, and only came to be at peace when it was covered again. Halavai, we should have that sensitivity, all of us, men and women, children, and we should give that over to our children. The children growing up today have nisyonos that I can't imagine if I would have had those nisyonos when I was a teenager, if I would have ever survived. No one should judge what kind of nisyonos teenagers grow up with. At the same time, we have a responsibility to see that at least they're educated properly, they understand what they are, they're not animals. They're Taira Yiddish and neshamas, and they should appreciate that. And if they don't appreciate it, at least we should appreciate who they are and how terrible it is when they act like animals and they're exposed to all of these things that their nations of the world have devised, which can be used for the most positive things and used for the greatest tumas also. If we understand how to use all of these areas, the kedusha, the tahara, and not chas v'shalom, the tuma, and for pritzus and gili arayas, then we'll be masakin this part of the Gehenna of Tisha B'Av, and be able next year to sit on chairs with a sudas melech HaMoshiach and binyan beis hamikdash. Shachar asher osan tzar b'fnei.